Okay. Okay, let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful for the opportunity that we have to once again study your word. And we ask, Lord, that as we look at the chronology of Noah's flood, that you can enlighten our minds and help us to understand the things that we are seeing. Help me to present it in a simple manner that all can understand it. Thank you for the people in this movement, for this message. And we pray, Lord, that the work that is done intellectually will affect our heart so that we can be spiritually enriched. Thank you for hearing our prayer. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, good morning, everyone. When we deal with the chronology of Noah's flood, I tried to address it. I did send out an email that has a bit of an explanation, but I really want you to visually see what this is about, why I've approached this problem the way that I have. Now, when we deal with the biblical calendar, we know that the year begins in the spring and that we have a number count that never that was not done until the time of the Exodus. That is, prior to the Exodus, they never numbered the months, and that is, you named the months, but you would generally just say what month it was. Now, if you're going to number them, you would number them based upon whatever it is you're referencing. So in the Bible, when it talks about the second month in the 600th year of Noah's life, the assumption that people make is, oh, that's the biblical second month. And that's the assumption that I made for a long time. I just assumed it's going to be the second month. Now, in the spring. Now, some people argued that, well, they actually counted the years in the fall prior to the time of the Exodus. Now, there's not really any evidence that that's the case. That is, when you look at a calendar, when we think of calendars, we think of calendars as always having a starting point. But that wasn't always the case. That is, people would count the year variously, like you might count it from the reign of a king. So if the king's reign began in the spring, and they would usually use something like the equinox, either the spring equinox or the fall equinox, but some places they would use the solstice, either the winter or the summer solstice, to start a year. So there was no fixed way to count a year or the reign of a king. But in the Bible, we can discern that the kings of Judah and Israel definitely did not use the same count. That is, they did not both start in the spring or both start in the fall. At least we can sort of demonstrate that it's most likely that the kings of Judah counted in the spring and the kings of Israel counted in the fall. Now, the Babylonians also counted in the spring, but there are times that the kings of Judah did count in the fall. And so this creates all kinds of confusion. That is, we're not given enough information to be 100% certain on any king's reign, whether it's counted spring to spring, fall to fall. Or in some cases, a king's reign will just be counted. The first month of his reign is going to start whenever he starts to reign, would be counted as the beginning of his first year. So you have all these complexities, and I don't want to go into that too much, except to say that it's not something that's fixed. That is, people couldn't just go out and buy a calendar and hang it on their wall with some pretty little kittens on it, and just know what the dates were going to be for that year. And they couldn't really generally plan ahead. That is, prior to the Exodus, people would observe the month. Every month, they would just look in the sky, and they would see, oh, the moon's full today, and A few days later, they can see it's waning, and then finally the moon won't show up at all. And then when they see the first visible crescent, they would know, oh, that tomorrow is going to be the first day of the month. That's how they would count it generally. But we don't know specifically. That is, we can't say exactly how this was determined. There is some good arguments to show that they never used the visible crescent as much as the full moon itself. Now, what I'm going to show you is how people would determine the month based upon the full moon. Now, when you think about it, if you wait till the 15th day of the month to figure out when the full moon is, what's the problem? What if you wait to see the full moon to decide which day is actually the 14th day of the month? What would be the problem with that? So just think about it. You're going along and you want to know what day of the month it is, but you have to wait until the middle of the month to know that it's the 14th day of the month. What would be the problem with that way of reckoning the month?
You've missed.
Hmm?
It's possible you've missed it.
Oh, okay. So you had to have counted the first day of the month. You needed to know in advance when the full moon is going to fall in order to say today is the first day of the month, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a problem, and that's why people would generally use the new moon or the first visible crescent at sunset to determine which day is going to be the first day of the month. That is, if they see the visible crescent at sunset, then the next day is going to be the first day of the month. Now, there's a lot of evidence to show, though, that the Passover could never occur until the day of the full moon. That is, you couldn't have the Passover happen before the full moon. And so that means they would have to know in advance when the full moon is going to occur. Now, we have, we're not so familiar with the moon nowadays, but we know that a month, a lunar month, is either going to be 30 days or 29. And you're going to have more 30-day months than 29-day months because the month is just slightly longer than 29 and a half days. But that's the average month. The month can vary quite a bit in length. Not so much a whole day, but half of a day. I mean, you can almost have a month that is 29 days. And you can almost have a month that is almost 30 days. So, and that's because that the moon is sometimes closer to the earth and sometimes farther away from the earth. Now, when the moon is what we call perigee or apogee, perigee is when it's the closest. Now, if, and I know this isn't the easiest thing to visualize for some people, but if the moon is closer to the earth in its orbit, because it has an elliptical orbit, is it going to be traveling faster or slower when it's close to the earth?
I would think faster.
Yeah, it's going to go faster. And when it's farther away from the earth, it moves slower. Now, what we have up in front of us is the month in which Jesus was crucified. That is, he was crucified in April of 31 AD. And when we have and you can see here, see how the moon and the sun, so I don't know if you can see that. I'm going to zoom in. Try to move this over. So here you have the moon and the sun. This is what we would call conjunction. That is, the moon isn't quite over the sun. And we're looking at this from Jerusalem, by the way. So and I'm just going to try to get this to move.
They wouldn't be able to see the moon.
Right. You wouldn't be able to see the moon because it's with the sun. So when the sun goes down, you obviously can't see the moon because the moon, one is you're going to only see the dark side of the moon if you could see it, but it's so close to the sun that you actually wouldn't see the moon at all. Now, this is what we call conjunction. Now, at this time in 31 AD, the moon is in apogee. That is, it's actually moving very slowly. Its transit across the skies at the slowest point on this date. Well, I don't know if it's exactly this date. I think it's like the 12th or something. Now I'm going to be moving here on these dates. I'm going to just move to the 11th. Now you can see actually the 11th is, and this is 4 in the afternoon. You can see that it's going to be, the moon is basically right over the sun. And I can't see this here. Oh, the moon's moved away. It's way up there. So I'm going to go back here. There's the moon, there's the moon, there's the moon. So it's on the 10th that it's in conjunction. And then on the 11th, it's a little further away. And this is about the time, this is about sunset here. So see this line here? I don't know if you can see that little green line. Jupiter's right on the line. The sun's right below it. This is the horizon. So if I ended up putting the land in here, oops, that's the atmosphere. I want the land. There's the land. Now you can see you can't actually even see the sun because the trees are blocking it. But that's your horizon. And then you can see on the next day, the moon is going to be further away. And you would actually see, even on this date, on the 11th, you would be able to see the visible crescent as the sun was setting. So this is in 31 AD. This is the month in which Jesus is crucified. And we know he was crucified on a Friday in 31 AD, and that Friday was the 14th day of the first month. Now, if the 12th day, or not the 14th, the 14th day of the first month. So if the 12th day is going to be the first day of the first month, which date would be the 14th of Nisan? So if the 12th of April is the first day of the first month, which day would be the 14th day of the first month? Which date would it be on our calendar? Which date would Jesus be crucified?
26th.
It'd actually be the 25th. So if the 12th is the first, you would count 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24 to the 25. And the 25th is a Wednesday. So there are people who believe in the Wednesday crucifixion, people that it occurs in 31 AD. And these would people be like the Worldwide Church of God, Herbert W. Armstrong, when he was alive. And we actually have across the hall from us, a lady that Heidi visits. She actually goes to the Worldwide Church of God, keeps the Sabbath, and believes in the Wednesday crucifixion, right? And they believe Jesus was crucified on a Wednesday in 31 AD. And they do this based upon the fact that if you were to see the visible crescent in 31 AD, you would see it on the 12th of April, and the 14th day of the first month would be on the 25th of April, and that would be the day that Jesus would be crucified on the Passover, and the 25th of April is a Wednesday. But Seventh-day Adventists say he was crucified 2 days later. So what's the reasoning? Why would we argue that Jesus is actually crucified on the Friday in 31 AD, when if we were to use the visible crescent, it would be a Wednesday? Does anybody know why? Why we argue that it's actually the first day of the first month is not April 12th, but it's April 14th?
Well, because we're told that the women were preparing spices and ointments on preparation day. The Sabbath was drawing in.
Okay, so So what people will do then is they'll say, well, Jesus couldn't have been crucified in 31 AD, that he must have been crucified in 30 AD, because in 30 AD, you will get a Friday crucifixion, and also 33 AD. So there's these arguments that Jesus was actually not crucified in 31 AD, but he was crucified in either 30 AD or 31 AD or 33 AD. So 31 AD is excluded if we base the month upon the sighting of the first visible crescent. So there's two ways around it. Whether which one is correct, it's hard to say, but one was put forward by Grace Amadon. Grace Amadon, her dad was actually a Millerite who was friends with Ellen G. White, and Grace Amadon was a scholar, and she did a lot of work on the chronology from Millerite history, and she argues, based upon all kinds of evidence, that you can't have a Passover in 31 AD on the Wednesday. And the problem is that the full moon is going to then occur, it would occur after the Passover. And you have to have the Passover on the day that's determined to be the full moon. So that's one solution. The other one, which was the solution I chose, whether it's correct or not, I don't know, but it would depend upon the conditions in the atmosphere. So just because we can, on a computer program, determine that we can see the new moon, and I'm just going to switch screens here. I'm going to share a different screen. So one of the programs I use to determine the new moon is this program here. It's well, it's not a program, it's a website, toracalendar.com. And what this does, it will give me this diagram, and I can choose which year and which month. Now, this is the second month on the Jewish calendar, not the first month, but that's because they start their year 1 month early. But if you see here, you'll see on April 11th, you can actually see the visible crescent. It's in this box. And so they're saying that you would be able to see this on the Wednesday evening. So Thursday, April 12th, would end up being the first day of the first month, which would make the 25th of April, which is a Wednesday, Passover. Now, but that's only if the atmospheric conditions are good. So what would you do if it was cloudy and you went out and you didn't see the visible crescent? What would you do? And you would only go out on the 29th. So first off, it would have to be the 29th. So they're assuming that this is the 29th day of the month, and that somebody went out and they saw the visible crescent in 31 AD, and so they determined that the next day was the first day of the first month. But what if it was cloudy and you went out on the 29th and you didn't see the visible crescent? Even though it could have been seen if there was no cloud, what would you do?
Wait till the next day.
Well, you would just automatically add the 30th day, and the next day you wouldn't even need to go out to look, because you can only have 30 days in a month. So you don't even need to bother to look the next day. If it's the 29th and it's cloudy, you automatically have a 30th day because you can't see the visible crescent. Even if you could see it, if the atmosphere was good, it doesn't matter. You would have to say, well, we have a 30th day this month. Now, that could happen in a series of months, especially in the winter. It is possible because you have the rainy season. It could even be a really dry spring. You could have lots of dust in the air. So there could be lots of reasons why you might not see a visible crescent. And so the one possibility is that even though we have this theoretical idea of how a calendar works, that there are situations that could arise that could affect the way you determine the month. So So I proposed, this was my initial proposal, whether it's correct or not, again, I don't know for certain because I wasn't there in 31 AD. I couldn't look at the sky. But it is possible that you would have a delay in a few months. That is, you go out on the 29th day of the 10th month and it's cloudy, so you add a 30th day. And then the next month the same thing happens, and then the next month the same thing happens. It would have to happen 3 months in a row actually in order for this to occur, because I need to have this delayed by 2 days. But that is possible. Okay, so now there's other possibilities too. One is the determination of the month, we think, because of Jewish tradition, that it was something that was done in sort of a strict set of rules. That is, we know that the rabbis say what would happen is that there would be somebody at the temple who was responsible for observing this visible crescent. And once the crescent was observed, and they would, give a report about it, and then they would have to have the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, and then they would determine that, yeah, the year has begun. Now, we don't know if that's actually what happened. This is a much later Jewish tradition. It's possible it could have happened that way. It's also possible that the beginning of the month would be determined by external factors, such as how other people around you perceived the months. That is, the Jews weren't the only one observing a month. And it would be rather confusing if you were trying to say, well, today's the 13th, but your neighbor thinks it's the 14th. So there is a good argument that the month was determined by consensus. That even if you saw a visible crescent, if nobody else saw it, or other people determined in some other way that the month had begun, you would just accept it. And the Romans, in the time of Christ, used a lunar calendar. And so it is possible that it was just determined by the Romans, not even by the Jews. So that's another possibility. But the possibility that Grace Amadon brings out is that the Passover has to occur on what we would call the day of the full moon. So I'm going to share another diagram here. I know this is a rather long explanation, but if you can't follow me, please let me know. If there's something that you're not understanding, I need to know so that I can maybe go back and explain it in a different way. Now, what I'm going to share here is a calendar. This is the calendar in 31 AD with the phases of the moon. And I don't know what they did to this program. It used to be that it went Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Now they start on Monday, which always confuses me. So you can see at the top there, it's got the days of the week, and they're not the way that I would like them to be. So you can see here the 12th of April is a Thursday. And if you counted, you would find the 25th over here. This is the 14th, because I'd go 1, 2, 3 if I was counting the new moons. And you could see at 1:56 in the afternoon on the 10th would be conjunction. And theoretically, the next evening at sunset, you would have seen the first visible crescent. And then the next day would be the first day of the first month. Now, Grace Amadon argues that the first day of the first month is going to be the 14th. And she does that based upon the full moon. Now, you'll see here on the 25th, it shows a full moon at 11:23 p.m. But that's what we call the astronomical full moon. And so I want to show you how the full moon is determined by the Jews. And by the Babylonians, they use the same method. Are people following what I'm saying here? Is anybody having problems with this? Okay. So I'm going to go to
Yeah, I'm finding it Sorry, Theodore. I'm finding it disturbing though that now they're saying that the first day of the week is Monday, because therefore now they're saying Sunday's the seventh.
Yeah, it's just the program has done. I don't know if there's something I could do to change this, whether this, but you see this a lot of nowadays, is they take, because a lot of people count the day from Monday. So, but yeah, I know it's kind of disturbing, but just ignore that. It's not going to affect the astronomy of it. So I'm going to go here to the stellarium now. So we're going back to this, and this is the beginning of the month, but we want to go to the time of the full moon. So I'm going to switch this over to the evening of the 25th. And what you're going to see here is that the sun is over here and the moon is way over here. So there's the horizon. And what you have to have happen, and the evening when the sun is setting, so I'm just going to go back a little ways, is the sun is always going to set, but before the sun sets at the time of the full moon, the moon is going to rise because they're on the opposite horizons, right? And I'm just going to move this a bit more so this is kind of center. And I'm going to get the horizon right there. So what you're going to see is here's the sun and here's the moon. And the sun has not yet set. And as I move this forward, you'll see that the sun still is not set. And then the moon is going to begin to rise. See how the moon is rising? So the moon is in the sky, but the sun has not set. Now, it's just above the horizon a little bit. It's not completely risen, but they would have determined tomorrow is not the day of the full moon. It's not yet the full moon because this is at sunset. And they're saying, well, since the moon is in the sky and the sun hasn't set, I'm going to have to wait till the next day. So on the next day, the 26th, you'll see the sun will set, right? See here, the sun sets. And then about 25 minutes, 30 minutes later, the moon will rise. And so we can say that the next day, that sunset is on the 26th. The 27th is going to be the day of the full moon. That would be the Passover. And so this is the argument. Now, the reason I showed you all this has to do with this, with Noah. So in 2390, I don't know why it does this way. For some reason, when I try to go BC dates, it just doesn't do it well. Maybe I can do it this way. Okay. Okay, that'll work. So what I want to do is go to the year 2391. So this is going to be in the fall. I'm going to go to September. And I'm going to go to the time of the full moon, which is going to be around the 12th. And I'm going to have to zoom out here. So where are we here? There's the moon. Got to get to the right time of day. There's the sun moving around. You can see it moving. Okay. And there's the sun. Where's the moon? There's Jupiter. I don't see the moon anywhere. Oh, that's why, because I'm at the beginning of the month. So the moon is actually, should be right behind the sun. I don't see it. Venus, Sirius. No, I'm pretty sure there was a moon back then. So let me see if I can fix this. September. Oh, there it is.
Yes, Daddy loves you. Get down. Get down. Come on.
Okay, whose microphone's on?
Houston.
Ron's. Okay. Okay, so let's take a look at, I found the moon. I don't know why I couldn't find it before. And so 2391, this is the 9th month, September. Just trying to figure out what I'm doing here. There's Mercury. There's the moon. Okay, so there we go. Now you can see the moon. Oh, it's just so far away. Get to the right time of day. Okay, that's the wrong month. There we go. September. Okay. When we look at this month, the month is September in 2391 BC. So this is going to be the first month of Noah's 600th year. And we're going to go through this. But what I did is I had to determine that the full moon would be on sunset on the 25th. So that center line there, this is the center line. I got that lined up wrong. And we have the moon. What am I doing? I'm in the wrong year. So the other thing I have to remember is when I'm dealing with this calendar, this one has a 0 year. So there we are. Now that makes sense. So you can see the moon over here. And I got to get the 0, the horizon. There's your horizon. Here's the sun. So this center is the horizon. The moon is above the horizon and the sun has set. So I'm just going to go back a little bit. So here you can see the moon is right below the horizon. The sun hasn't set. And as I start to move forward, see the moon has risen and the sun is not yet set. Now, when I go to the next day, so now on the 25th, the sun is going to set. And after the sun sets, the moon then rises. So that means the 14th day of the first month is going to be the 26th of September. So this is what I did. Now, hopefully that visualization helps. So what we have here now is the calendar that we had looked at the other day. And this is the year of Noah's flood. I went through this morning. I went through with the stellarium and looked at each month and just double checked my calendar. I actually had to correct a couple of things. For some reason in July, I was one day off. It didn't affect any of my biblical dates. I mean, it didn't affect the days of the week. It just affected the relationship of the biblical dates with our calendar. So here's what we determined. This calendar, because of the anomaly of the moon, because of the new moon's elliptical orbit, in order to fit the spans of time that are given us in Genesis, and we're going to look at Genesis chapter 7 and 8 in a bit more detail. In order to fit those spans of time within the year 2390 BC, the only fit that I could find was this fit. That is, if I had started with, in the spring of 2390 BC, you wouldn't have the spans of time fit a lunar calendar. So we had to tried all these different options by trial and error to find out the best fit. And the best fit is this fit here. So I'm going to go through and try to explain some of these decisions. So the first thing is I had to determine some kind of calendar. I had to line up a biblical calendar with our calendar in some way. And so I'm just going to read a little bit here. We'll go through this and hopefully people can understand it enough to ask questions. It's terrible if it's you don't even know what questions to ask. But as we go through it, maybe this will become clear. So this chronology begins in the 600th years of Noah's life. That is, in 1656 AM or 2391 BC. Now, 1653 AM just means Anno Mundi, in the year of the creation of the world. And I'm counting that actually from the fall. So at the equinox in 1656, that's when it becomes 1656 AM. So technically this is before the equinox when the first month begins. So it actually starts in 1655 AM, as you'll see. The door of the ark closes on the 10th day of Tishri. That's what we would call Tishri, the 7th month now, or Ethanim. That's just an old Hebrew name for the 7th month. On the Day of Atonement. The 7th month is the 2nd month of Noah's 600th year. From the 17th day, the date has a continuous count on the top right. So we're going to look at these counts that I have in this chart. There's a number on the bottom left for the counter of the 150 days that the water prevails, and a number on the bottom left for the 150 days that the water abates. So you'll see what I'm talking about when we look at the scriptures here. Many people assume that the 150 days goes from the day the rains begin, to the day the ark arrives on the shelter of the mountains of Ararat. As you can see, this is only 149 days, so we will go through this. On a 30-day month calendar, it would be 151 days. Also, if we use either a 360 prophetic or a 360-day Egyptian calendar, the prevailing and abating of the water for 150-day periods for each would not fit. Only this calendar works. So you can see here, I have the first month. This is the chronology, each of the marks, the way marks explained. The first month, first day is September 13th, 2391 BC. It's still technically in the 1655th year from creation because it's before the equinox. And so if we look here, oops, I'm going too far back. Here we go. So this is the first month, the 6th month. Now it's going to have 30 days. That is, I looked at each one of these things. So when you see the 14th day on the top number of any of these months, that's because that is at sunset on the 13th. That's how I determine which day is the 14th. I would look at sunset on the 13th and find that that is the first time that the sun sets before the moon rises. So that makes this the 14th day of each month. So I'm doing this just as you would do with the Passover to determine each of the months. So you're going to see that the 26th of October is going to be the 14th day of the 7th month. So that means the 22nd of October is going to be the 10th day of the 7th month. So this was something, as I said, I didn't notice it when I first did it because I wasn't really thinking about it. This is the day the door of the ark closes. You can see I've counted the 7 days that the animals are coming into the ark, starting on the 3rd day of the 7th month. On the 10th day of the 7th month, the door of the ark closes. And these are inclusive counts. That is, and Ellen White says it's on the 8th day. So that means that there was 7 previous days. And then on the 8th day, the door of the ark closes, which of course the 8th day is the 7th day of the week there. So it's going to be the Sabbath. And then you're going to see this is the 7 days they're in the ark. And I think she says on the 8th day that the rain begins. That's what she says here. So you're going to have the 29th is going to be the day that the rains begin. And in the top right corner, you probably can't see it on your screen, but you should be able to in your email. It has a number 1, and that's going to count the days that it rains. So it's going to rain for 40 days. On the last day of the 40 days is the 26th day of, or the 7th day of December. It's the 26th day of the 8th month on the biblical calendar, the month Heshvan, and or sometimes called Marheshvan. And it's the 3rd month in Noah's 600th year of life. And it's December 7th on our calendar. I think I did this right. I know I had some typos here. Yeah, so December 7th, Wednesday, December 7th, 2391 BC. That's when the rain ends. So you can see that that's the end of the rain. And then what you're going to have is the next day. Now I'm going to keep that count going, 41, 42, 43. So I'm actually counting the days of the flood on the top, and it's a continuous count. But on the bottom left of the date, I'm going to have a number as well. And that number is going to represent the time that the water prevails. So we're going to look at this and see what I'm talking about here. So the prevailing of the waters is mostly just assumed because it's 150 days that the water prevails. And then it's also 150 days that the water abates. This isn't generally noticed by people. They just think it's the same period of time. So we go to Genesis 7:17, and the flood was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased and bare up the ark, and it was lifted up above the earth. And then it says, and the waters prevailed and were increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark went upon the face of the waters. The waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. And all flesh died that moved upon the earth, both of fowl and cattle and beast, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, all in whose nostrils was the breath of life, of all that was in the dry land died. So, and it says the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. So the way that I understand this is it rains for 40 days. That's where the waters increase. And then for 150 days, the waters prevail. Does that seem clear to people, what I'm saying? That the 150 days does not include the 40 days.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's usually assumed that it does. For anybody who looks at it, some people think the flood's only 40 days, but it's the 40 days that the water increases. Now this word increased, rabbah, is, and you have this other word prevailed, gabar. You can see they're not the same word. So the water increasing is when it's, and the word means to increase in whatever respect. to bring abundance. So it would be like a harvest. You would use it um, to gather, take over, multiply. So the whole idea is that it's growing. During those 40 days, the fountains of the great deep are opened up, the sky is opened up, and for 40 days the water increases. And then in verse 18 it says the water prevailed. So we're going to see that word 1396 show up again and again. And that's going to be, it says that the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. So in order to take into account this calendar, I had to say, well, there's 40 days, which is just an ordinal count. It's what we call inclusive reckoning, the counting each day. There's 40 of them. And then there's 150 days that the water prevails. And then it says the flood subsides. So Genesis chapter 8, and God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the cattle that were with him, that was with him in the ark. And God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters were assuaged. Now this word assuage, shakak, appeased, to cease, to pacify. So this would be that the waters are calmed in some ways. Now it says also, and then it says the fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven restrained. So we know that even though it talks about this 40 days and 40 nights, that the waters increased, whatever rain was happening now has stopped. So there would have been some rain. And also the fountains of the deep are no longer going to be providing water for this. So this will allow the waters to abate, right? It says the waters return from off the earth continually. So that means the waters are going to start going down. And this word returned is that Hebrew word shuv, which is used as sometimes turn. I will return again the captivity. It's also right at the beginning of the year, the return of the year. So the return of the year is also, they use the word shuv. So, and the waters, mayim, waters, returned from off the earth continually. And you'll see they're going to use this word again. Continually just means halak, which means to walk or to return. After the end of the 150 days, the waters were abated. So this is where people think about the waters prevailed for 150 days, but the waters are abated. This is abating of the waters. This would also occur for an additional 150 days. Because if the waters are prevailed, that means they're going to be 15 cubits above the mountains for 150 days. They're not going to, at the end of the 150 days, instantly be abated. Right? So this is a period of time of 150 days. Now it says after the end of the 150 days, so there's this, that's the extremity. So there's going to be 150 days that it's going to take for the waters to abate. And then the ark, and you couldn't have the waters abating while they're prevailing, right? So they have to prevail for 150 and then they have to abate for 150. Does that make sense to people, what I'm saying about the waters abating and the two periods?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so it's going to talk about the waters prevailing for 150 years. Now it talks about the abating, and then it goes back and it does some repeat and enlarge. So it says the ark rested in the 7th month on the 17th day of the month upon the mountains of Ararat. So what people have assumed is that the flood lasts for 150 days plus the 40 days. So some people have it 150 days total, including the 40 days. And some people have the 140 days or the 40 days and the 150 days to make 190 days. But you can see that this can't be correct because it says the ark rested on the 7th month on the 17th day of the month upon the mountains of Ararat. Now, I'm arguing that this is occurring prior to the waters abating. And this resting upon the mountains of Ararat is not the ark resting on dry land, but the ark coming to rest or to be in that area of the mountains of Ararat, and it's resting, it's staying in that place. The ark is not moving. So it's shielded in some ways by the mountains, because even though there's 15 cubits of water above the tops of the mountains, this would still be a type of shelter. Does that make sense to people, what I'm saying here about this 17th day of the 7th month? So I'm going to show you another diagram here, just to sort of illustrate what we're talking about. So in this diagram here, you can see there's the 40 days that go to the day that the door of the ark is shut. So I'm just going to zoom in a bit more so you can see this better. And there's the 7 days the animals come into the ark. So it's part of the 40 days. Now, this 40 days isn't mentioned by name. It just happens to be an artifact of how the calendar works. And then you're going to have 7 days that they're shut in the ark. And then the 40 days of rain. And then, now here's the supposed 150 days that some people have. That is, they have the 150 days include the 40 days. And then the waters have abated in their minds on the 17th day of the 7th month. But we know that that's not the case because of the period of time that's left in the calendar. There's a whole description of what happens. So we're gonna see that the tops of the mountains don't actually appear until the first day of the 10th month. So you'll see what I mean here. I'm gonna move this a bit over, make it a bit smaller. So this 17th day of the 7th month, the ark's going to come and rest in the area of the mountains of Ararat. That is, it's not resting upon the mountains, upon dry ground, because the mountains are still covered. And we're going to see that when it says that we don't see the tops of the mountains until the first day of the 10th month, which is going to be basically 73 days later. So it would make no sense that they rest on the mountains of Ararat, but the tops of the mountains are not seen until 63 days later, 73 days later. Okay? Does that make sense, this drawing here, what I have?
You said the 150 days.
Yeah,
I only see one there.
there's one and the other one. So you got,
I don't see the other 150 days there.
well, you see the 150 days the water prevails and the 150 days the water abates.
Okay, up top there, I didn't see that.
Yeah. Okay. Now, it's interesting that it's 220 days from the day that the rains begin until the tops of the mountains are seen. Now, we talk about 220 days in the story of the flood, and most people use that from the 17th day of the 7th month to the 27th day of the 2nd month when they leave the ark. So this was this symbol of the 220 days that we have in the story of Noah comes from this false 220 days, because it's actually more than 220 days, because there's 13 months in here. But we also have a period of 220 days that is created from the 17th day of the 2nd month to the first day of the 10th month. And so even though that we don't have the same period of 220 days that we would normally expect, we do have a period, and that's from the rain to the times that the top of the mountains appear. And so that still works for the symbol of the 220. And we'll go through this a bit more just to kind of reiterate this. Now, I'm going to go back to the scriptures here. So it says the ark rested on the 7th month, the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. Now, in trying to understand this, this word upon can be translated against, above, among, right? So it doesn't mean that the ark rested physically upon the mountains, but it was among the mountains of Ararat. And then it says the water decreased continually until the 10th month. And in the 10th month, on the first day of the month, were the tops of the mountains seen. So we can see that it doesn't really make sense that the ark rests on the mountains of Ararat, right, upon the land, but it's going to be 73 days later until the tops of the mountains are seen. Can people follow what I'm saying here?
It seems to make sense, yeah.
Yeah, so that means that they're just among the mountains of Ararat. They're resting among the mountains of Ararat. 73 days later, the water decreases enough that they can now see the tops of the mountains. And then it says, and it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made. So this is an extremely important point. So once they see the tops of the mountains, they're going to count 40 days. Now, many people read this, it's kind of funny. I mean, you can get children's books where they think it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. And at the end of the 40 days and 40 nights, then Noah opens the window of the ark. But we can see that this is actually much later, right? So this 40 days, we're counting from the first day of the 10th month. So Noah opens the window of the ark which he had made, and he sent forth a raven, which went forth to and fro until the waters were dried up from off the earth. So when he lets go of the raven, does the raven come back? When it says he went to and fro, what does that mean? Until the water.
Back and forth.
Yeah, back and forth. Now, of course, we're dealing with the Hebrew word, yatsah, and two Hebrew words, and shu. So this actually means to go and return, is one of the ways this could be translated. But so to go, technically yatsah means to go. And that's the same word for the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem, by the way. And then the shuv, return, right? So the idea is either the raven is just going back and forth from the tops of the mountains or whatever and coming back to the ark, or it's just going around, flying around. It's not coming back. It's not clear if you'd read this. And then he's going to send forth a raven, or send forth the dove. Also, he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters were abated from off the face of the ground. And the dove found no rest for the sole of her foot, and she returned, again, that's that word shuv, unto him into the ark, for the waters were on the face of the whole earth. Then he put forth his hand and took her and pulled her unto him into the ark. And he stayed yet other 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark, and the dove came in to him in the evening, and lo, in her mouth was an olive leaf plucked off. So Noah knew that the waters were abated from off the earth. And he stayed yet other 7 days, and he sent forth the dove, which returned not again unto him any more. Now, this word, we have, he knew that the waters were abated from off the earth. They obviously were not abated completely, because it's going to be 150 days, and that's not 150 days yet. And we'll see that when we get to that part. Now, the question is, does he send the raven and the dove together on the first day, or does he send them on different days? Anybody know the answer to that?
It would seem that they were on different days.
Okay, so first Dwight.
It would seem that they were sent on different days.
Okay, it seems they're sent on different days. Stephen?
Does Ellen White make a statement saying they're different?
Yeah. And she says it's actually 7 days apart. Okay, so the statement here, I'll just show it to you. This is from Patriarchs and Prophets. Oops. Share the screen here properly. Noah and his family anxiously waited for the decrease of the waters, for they longed to go forth again upon the earth. 40 days after the tops of the mountains became visible, they sent out a raven, a bird of quick scent, to discover whether the earth had become dry. This bird, finding nothing but water, continued to fly to and from the ark. So that's how she says it. So he's going to go back and forth. 7 days later, a dove was sent forth, and finding no footing, returned to the ark. Noah waited 7 days longer and again sent forth the dove. When she returned at evening with an olive leaf in her mouth, there was great rejoicing. Later, Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was still dry. So when we look at this, then we can see, based upon what Ellen White says and what the Bible says, there's actually the setting forth of the raven. 7 days later, the dove is sent. It's sent again 7 days later, and this time it comes back with an olive leaf, and then another 7 days it's released but doesn't come back. Does that anybody disagree with that?
Well, at this point, no.
Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward if you put together the Bible statements and the spirit of prophecy. So there's 4 times a bird is let out. First the raven, then the dove, then the dove, then the dove. So it's like a 3-1 combination in reverse. Okay. Now, so I'll go back to this drawing here. So you can see the 40 days, and then we're going to have the raven sent, the dove sent 7 days later, the dove sent 7 days later again. That time it's going to come back with an olive leaf, and then 7 days later again, the dove is sent and does not return. Now notice how many days it is. It's 22 days, right? So 22 days is also a symbol of restoration.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So I have these different spans I just show from the first day of the 10th month to the first day of the first month is going to be 120 days. That's counting the first day and the first day. So it'd be 119 cardinal days. I have this 150 days. That's the waters abating. So you're going to see that the waters are going to be abated on the first day of the first month. And that's when they're going to take the roof of the ark off. And that's going to be the 601st year of Noah's life on the first day of the first month. So Uncle Arthur's Bible storybook says it's Noah's birthday. I don't know if it's quite his birthday, but it'd definitely be the first day of the first month in the 600th year of his life. And then you're going to still have, once they take the roof off the ark, in order for the ground to be dry enough for them to go on, they're going to wait almost another 2 months. So you can see that the water is going to abate, and it's fully abated, but the ground is still not dry enough for them to go down and dwell on it. So there's still going to be this period of time of the drying of the land.
Probably muddy and unstable.
Yeah. So you have to wait until everything's nice and dry, because they got to take all the animals off. They don't want to get stuck in the mud or whatever. And I don't think that they're at the tops of the mountains. It's not like the ark is sitting on the top of a mountain, but it's in the mountains of Ararat and not Mount Ararat. whatever that would be. I mean, whether they would know which mountain is Mount Ararat per se. So that you can see that this chart makes sense, that this was worked out in great detail, taking into account all the spirit of prophecy statements and all the Bible statements. And what it requires then, in order for this calendar to work, is you have to have a year of 385 days. That's the longest that you can have a solar lunar calendar year to be, a lunar solar calendar, right? So this calendar happens to work out perfectly if we line it up this way, but I couldn't get it to work any other way. So it is complex. Some people might be able to go through and start, examining some of the claims I'm making with the calendar, and how the full moons are determined. And there's a couple of them they're pretty close to try to decide would the moon be visible or not. Now, the other question that we would have is, how is Noah determining the days or the months? How is he determining the months? Like, is he able to observe the moon every month? Or is Noah doing this? Or is this something that God revealed to Moses when he wrote out this story? I mean, there's questions we don't have answered. But
God had to reveal it.
yeah, so this is, to me, one of the most amazing stories from a chronological perspective, the story of the flood. First is we have these very precise spans of time and precise dates. So when we look again at this calendar, go back here. So one of the things that was remarkable about this is that the door of the ark closes on the 22nd of October on the Julian calendar. And God has used the Julian and the Gregorian and the Islamic calendar and the Mayan calendar with these prophetic symbols. So to me, this is quite profound, that we can connect the closing of the door of the ark on the 10th day of the 7th month on October 22nd to the closing of probation for the Millerites on October 22nd on the Gregorian calendar on the 10th day of the 7th month on the biblical calendar. To me, this was quite a remarkable coincidence that something like this could occur if it wasn't by design. And I didn't try to make it fit to October 22nd. That is, I didn't even notice that it was October 22nd until I first presented this. So that was quite remarkable for me. Then we have the fact that it's a Sabbath, which would make sense. Not that it has to be. The Bible doesn't say it's a Sabbath. But we can see that these 7 days are the 7 days sort of the week. That is, it's referring to a weekly period of time. The other thing that was interesting was these dates here. So on the 11th day of the 3rd month, you're going to have the raven sent out. And that's going to be a Sunday. And what would be the significance of that? That you're going to have the raven and then the dove 3 times. And every time they're sent out, it's sent out on a Sunday.
You got a clean bird, you got a 3 unclean bird and a clean bird.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything with that.
Well, yeah, it's like a 3-1 combination of sorts. So, you got 3 doves and 1 raven. But also notice it's an actual natural week, right? That he's going to choose to do it on one day of the week. And the Sunday would be a good day of the week to send out a raven or a dove. And that he's going to wait 7 days each time. I think that's quite interesting. So this would be,
So I could observe the Sabbath.
yeah, they would have observed the Sabbath, but also if, you're going to send it on the first day of the week and see, maybe this week we can get out, because you're not going to want to come out on, on a Sabbath or maybe even on a Friday. You probably have a bit of work to do. Now, the day that they do take the roof off the ark is going to be a Tuesday. So that's going to be what they call the first day of the first month. It happens to be the sixth month on the biblical calendar. So it shows that Noah was born in the fall. Now, this is going to be October 3rd on the solar calendar, on the Julian calendar. And then that they're finally going to come out of the ark on the 27th day of November, which is also the 27th day of the seventh month. They call it the second month of Noah's 600th year. And the 150 days, the first day of the first month, that's the 150th day that the water was abating. So on the last day of the 150 days that the water was abating from off the earth, they take the roof of the ark off. So the water's dry, the water has abated. They take off the roof of the ark, and then they wait till the 27th of the next month. So basically 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks, just less a day. And then on a Monday, they're going to leave the ark. So
Okay,
yeah.
I have a question based on what you have just said, I think 3 times.
Okay.
You're saying that this was in the 600th day of Noah's life.
601st year of Noah's life. Pardon me. Thanks for correcting me. Yeah. So it's the 601st year. So the flood begins in his 600th year. Yes. Thanks for correcting me. And it's the 601st year of Noah's life. So that means he's 601 years old when he takes the roof off of the ark. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for correcting my verbal typo. Okay. And so you can see this all works out in a remarkable way with some coincidences that seem to be providential, that can't be just coincidence. Yeah, so it says the waters dried from off the earth in the 601st year of Noah, the first month, the first day. And then Noah's going to leave the ark on the 27th day of the second month. So it says the waters are dried from off the earth. The waters have finished being abated. But they're still going to be waiting for nearly 2 months. So, exactly what they mean by the waters are dried off from off the earth. We know the waters had abated. But yeah, they still have to wait. Okay. So any other questions, any other corrections?
Well, okay, on your paper that's in front of us right now,
Yeah.
you will correct that from 600th to 601st, right?
Well, this one here, the 12th month, third day, that's still in the 600th year of Noah's life. So this one's correct.
Where you have 8, Genesis 8:6, it says 600th year of Noah's life. Okay.
Yeah, that's still correct. So these are
Okay.
still in the 600th year.
Okay.
And then it's going to change to the 601st year on the first day of the first month.
Got it.
That is the first day of the first month of Noah's 600th year or 601st year. But that's going to be, it's going to be the October 3rd. It's going to be on the correct biblical calendar. It's going to be the 6th month, right? It's going to be the month Elul, right? And then it's going to be in the month Tishri, the 7th biblical month now, how we would call it, on the 27th day that they're going to leave the ark, right? So, okay. Now, so I talk a bit here about this chiastic structure that exists. So that's one thing that's interesting. We do have our first chiasm. So even before we have the chiasm of Abraham. And the question is, can we see this chiasm as connected to the covenant that God has made with Noah? Because remember, the chiasm that God makes with Abraham when he has him cut the animals in half, that is a chiasm. And it also is connected to the chiasm of the 430 years divided into two periods of 215. So can we see that these two periods of 150 days are symbolically connected to a covenant?
I would say yes.
Yeah, they would have to be, right? And so what we have here in the story of Noah is a lot of things that are utilized again in other ways in other prophecies. Periods of 7 days, two periods of 7 days we see there, with these periods of 40 days. So 40 days is for the first time utilized in the Bible in the story of the Genesis flood. And that 40 days shows up again and again. So we would have to think that the other periods of 40 days are connected to these periods of 40 days in a symbol. That, they're just not arbitrary that it's 40 days. Now we have two explicit periods of 40 days mentioned, the 40 days that it rains, and also the 40 days from the first day of the 10th month to when they send out the raven. And then we have an incidental period of 40 days that just is by counting the calendar from the first day of the first month to the day that the door of the ark closes happens to be 40 days. And so, let's say Noah is actually born on the first day of the first month, and that is his birthday, that he turns 600 years old. We could see that this 40 days is, what does the 40 days represent? Because if we could think about all the different periods of 40 days and the different periods of 40 years, what do they represent? Why 40?
Well, you get Christ, 40. Christ.
Okay, well, Christ,
40 days.
yeah, so he fasts for 40 days in the wilderness.
There's also the 40 days where he's giving very direct instruction to the disciples after the crucifixion.
Right. So you got those 40 days. And you got the 40 days that the spies spy out the land, which produces a period of 40 years that they're in the wilderness. And Jesus actually fasts for 40 days based upon the 40 years in the wilderness, right? Because when Satan comes to him at the end of 40 days, he quotes Moses from Deuteronomy, where it says, God fed you with manna for 40 years, because to teach you that which you would not know, that man doth not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. Or something to that effect. And Jesus quotes that at the end of 40 days. So we can see that the 40 years that they're fed with manna is the bread or the word of God, and Christ references that when tempted by Satan. So we have these periods of 40 days, but the first period of 40 days mentioned is the period of 40 days of rain, right? 40 days is not mentioned prior to that. So what does this law of first mention mean in that context? What is this 40 days about? Why does God keep using it? Why does he give it to us in the first place? I know I'm asking you to read God's mind. Jeff, I think your mic is on and I can't mute it. It's a bit noisy. So anybody have any ideas why this 40 days?
Yeah, you had Nineveh as well.
What's
Jonah was going around Nineveh
Okay.
saying 40 days.
Okay, so what is the 40 days then? I mean, we have all these periods of 40 days and 40 years, but why? I mean, we could keep naming them because there's lots more, but
Doesn't seem to be one thing, like the 40 days with Nineveh was like a probation
okay.
period.
Well, it's also connected to a warning period, right? Of some sort. Spying out the land, the 40 days they spy out the land, it's kind of like a test as well.
But that was something that God wasn't commanding them to do. That's something they just wanted to check out initially. They
Yeah.
could have just gone into the land without spying it out.
Yeah, that's true. But they ended up doing it. It happened to be 40 days. And of course, they it kind of backfired for them. Turned into 40 years. But yeah, it's an interesting period of time. It has a number of different symbols. But I think it first comes here with the flood. But the fact that there are 40 days prior to the door of the ark closing, I don't think we can just ignore that either from the first day of the first month. Now this also ties us to the other stories. It ties us to the Exodus with a type of chronology that has some similarities to this. The first day of the first month is mentioned, same in the story of Ezra leaving Babylon. You got the first day of the first month mentioned. Now, of course, this first day of the first month is the 6th month, right? So it's not the first day of the first month on the modern Jewish calendar or the biblical calendar. But it was just very bizarre to be able to take this year, 2390 BC, and to be able to take these spans of time and fit them in with the calendar that was produced in this way. That is, we just started when we wanted to do this. It wasn't like we thought we were going to end up with what we ended up with. We just had to look at the details of this story, find out what the Bible and Spirit of Prophecy said about these spans of time, and fit them into some kind of calendar. Whatever calendar would have worked, we would have been happy with. And we did so many different calendars that didn't work. That is, we couldn't produce dates that were reconcilable with the spans of time. So, I hope people now can sort of appreciate a little bit about how complex this is, and that what we end up getting when we look at this chronology of the flood is quite profound, and it shouldn't just be ignored. But I know not everybody can really grasp the significance of it if they haven't spent the time to try to make these things work. And I find it a little bit disappointing when some people will just say, well, it was a 360-day year and a 30-day month prior to the flood, on a superficial examination of these spans of time. Because one is, you couldn't put the two periods of 150 days in there. They wouldn't fit in that calendar. So it just didn't work. A 360-day calendar didn't work. And the 30-day months don't work. Even though, in a superficial way they would. You just think, but that's because we would be counting cardinally, and they're not. They have to count this ordinally, that because that's how they're counting. You can see quite clearly that the entire way they're counting, when they talk about 7 days or 40 days, it's not a cardinal count. It's counting each of those days individually. Otherwise, there would be too much inconsistency. It wouldn't make any sense, and things just wouldn't fit.
When you said the Romans used the lunar calendar,
Yeah.
would they not be using the Julian calendar in the time of Christ?
Okay. So good question. They used both calendars. So you had the official Julian calendar. And see, that's the thing about calendars that we don't seem to grasp, because we have kind of one calendar everyone uses for everything. But they still use the Macedonian calendar. That was the calendar that the common people used. Julius Caesar making a calendar, people don't care. I mean, there's obviously this official calendar that exists, but they had a lunar calendar that that most people used, and that was just basically a variation of the Babylonian calendar. And you can find this in ancient writings, that it's quite clear that they still determined the month by the moon. And this would be the calendar they would use for religious festivals that had nothing to do with the Romans, and also for harvest and so forth. So in functioning, in trying to work through this idea of how calendars work, it's such a complex system because people just they didn't think of calendars the way that we think of them. It wasn't something they generally just, everybody had a calendar in their house. They went out and bought a calendar. There was calendars that they could use, that the state made, but they had to deal with the market calendar. And they had it's just kind of fascinating, the complexity of it. We're not used to it because we don't use the sky for a calendar. But for people who are observing a calendar that is just the calendar of the sky, a lunar calendar makes sense. So it's going to exist even if you have another type of calendar, right? You're going to know which month it is because you're going to see the moon. And so that calendar always exists. Until we get modern illumination, people always looked at the moon. Now we don't. We hardly even notice the moon. Does that help answer your question there, Stephen?
It is, yes, thanks.
Yeah, it's kind of remarkable, actually. And so there would be this, when it came to the month, there would be this month that would sort of be a consensus. It would come about by consensus. That is, you're not going to be arguing that it's the 14th of your month when it's the 15th of someone else's lunar month. So the lunar month is just something that people come to understand based upon their observation, because it's just communicating to other people what month it is. And so there doesn't seem to be any evidence, for instance, that I could find that there is 2 different months, that exist at the same time, like as far as a count. It doesn't mean, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. But, it seems logical when you start to think about the practicality of what a calendar means, what a month means. It's just something for you that you need to have in common with other people. If it's not in common with other people, it's not very useful. So hopefully that gives people a much better understanding of how these calendars work, and how I determined this chronology of the flood. Now, what we have to do tomorrow is really go through the reform line of Noah. So I wanted to work out the chronology first, though, because I think it helps us a little bit more. And then we have to try to decide what his reform line is. And if we have the door of the ark closing, just to kind of think about this beforehand, we would have to see that that door of the ark closes at the arrival of the third angel's message. And that all of this, we need to understand what this means. That is, we have a time of the end that comes, we have all of these events, and we would have to say that this all would parallel, in some ways we would have to find the parallel for the reform line in Millerite history. And it just seems that you would take the closing of the door of the ark as the close of probation. And so we have to decide when this reform line begins and what the different waymarks are. What role the animals coming into the ark, what does that represent? Does that represent the midnight cry? You know, those types of things. Does that make sense to people?
Yes, it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you can see the 7 days after the door of the ark closes. So, you know, we know that the Sabbath, the seventh day, is connected to that in creation and also in Millerite history. So we're going to go through that tomorrow and try to understand this. So, you know, I want people to spend a bit of time thinking about it on their own. And so I just need some feedback. I need to feel like somebody understood this well enough that it was useful. Because this was hard to do. This was hard to sort of present. I worked a lot on it.
I can appreciate that.
Okay. And it does make more sense to people now. We understand it better.
Yeah, it makes more sense.
Okay.
Well, there's things that jump out at me with this pictorial representation of that time period, like the 22 days and the 220 days. For instance, you know, the 1/10 of
Yeah.
the 220 that is there. So there are things in there that set precedents for the things that we've seen.
Yeah. And that was the remarkable thing for me, is that when we did this, because this was a long time ago, this would have been, and I'm pretty sure this was in 2015, that we did this. I'm trying to remember. Was it 2016? When we worked this out. Anyway, when we worked out this chronology, you know, we're studying all these other things and just all these little pieces of the puzzle falling into place, that if it wasn't for this chronology of the flood, I definitely wouldn't have been able to really understand the chronology of Snow's letters, for instance. That is, in working out this chronology of the flood, I had worked out so many other things. That was in 2015, 2016, end of 2015. No, the end of 2016, the beginning of 2017, I think that I worked this out. That's right. Because I hadn't had this worked out when I met Stephen in 2016 in Arkansas. I hadn't had these details worked out. This was one of those mysteries that I had to solve. But this definitely opened up a huge understanding of chronology for me, and determining the calendar and how it worked. So if you can at least understand a little bit of it, then you know, this presentation, you might have to watch it over again. You might have to read through the notes and spend a bit of time on your own to get a better picture of it. But if somebody's having real trouble with it, you can always study it out and ask me questions if there's things that you don't understand. And that goes for people on the internet as well. So there's going to be, I'm sure that some people will have questions. The biggest thing I run into with this is people who keep insisting that it has to be a 360-day year. And I wrote a whole paper on that, trying to explain why it can't be a 360-day year. But anyway, let's, if there's no other questions, we can close with prayer. Okay. Dear Father in heaven, thank you once again for waking me up early to prepare for this study. And I'm thankful for each participant. I pray that you can bless them, that they can continue to study and understand your word. We ask for your continued correction and for light, and that we can walk in the light that you give us. We pray for this movement, the people involved in it. We ask that you can work upon their hearts. Thank you for hearing our prayer. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay.